Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well and welcome back to War Thunder Sim. Today we're looking at an old school piece of American muscle, the Curtiss P-40E-1 Warhawk. Now this was an aircraft that saw extensive service during the Second World War and was used by most Allied powers during the conflict. Now in War Thunder, the Warhawk is a rank 2 aircraft with a battle rating of 2.3 for simulator battles, sitting squarely at the bottom of the EC2 bracket. Now, for its battle rating, the Warhawk has a pretty punchy armament consisting of 6 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, which have 1686 rounds of ammunition between them, which is quite good for an opening aircraft at this tier, considering the potency of 50 caliber rounds at this tier as well. You're not going to be coming up against too many armored targets, and you're going to be coming up against potentially quite a few enemies that don't have very good self-sealing fuel tanks, or no self-sealing fuel tanks, and you'll be able to get some fires going pretty quickly. Now, the P-40 is powered by an Allison V1710 V12 engine, which produces approximately 170 horsepower in the game, which gives it a top speed of 560 kilometers an hour at an altitude of 3,800 meters when it is unspaded, and when it's spaded, it sits just under 600 kilometers an hour. So in a straight line, this thing is pretty quick. In fact, that is one of its main strengths. It holds very good speed in a straight line, and there isn't much at its tier that can outrun it in a straight line, which is something you should definitely consider when you take this aircraft out. Now, the P-40 is considered one of the earliest iterations of a multi-role fighter. It can be employed as a fighter interceptor or as a fighter bomber, and as such it does come with some ordnance loadout options to choose from. So if we go into here and check out secondary weapons, you can see it has the options of carrying 100-pound bombs, or a much larger 500-pound bomb, or 2 100-pound bombs and a 500-pound bomb. Now, compared to other aircraft you find later on in the game, that doesn't seem like a particularly potent armament, but when you're looking down here at low tier, when you've only got a 2.3 BR plane, a 500-pound bomb can do significant damage, particularly if you take it into a tank game, be that Tank RB or Tank Sim, but today we are just looking at Sim, of course. Now, of course, bear in mind, if you do take out a ordnance loadout of bombs, it will severely affect the aircraft's flight handling performance, particularly its roll rate will be dramatically reduced if you take the full bomb loadout consisting of the 2 100-pound bombs and the 500-pound bombs. But today we're not going to be worrying about bombs. Today we're going to be looking at this thing's performance just as a straight up fighter and interceptor, which is where this thing really shines when it comes to simulator battles in the game. It's got a few solid things going for it. Of course, you've got the armament straight away. 6 50 cal machine guns at 2.3, that's bloody dangerous. It is quick. It is quick by top tier standards for EC2, so this thing can keep up with a decent amount of aircraft that have a battle rating of 3.3, let alone 2.3. Now, some people love to fly this aircraft and some people don't. The critics of it say it is too sluggish, it's not particularly good at turning, and they find that it gets outrated by a lot of other aircraft. Yes and no. The thing with the Warhawk is, it is a good turner, but when you lose speed in this thing, its ability to be maneuverable drops off a cliff. You really need to be going, over 400, ideally over 425 kilometers an hour for this thing to be good in the turns. It will out-turn 109s at that speed. The other good thing is this thing has excellent energy retention in vertical turns and better maneuverability in vertical turns as opposed to horizontal turns. So you're going to be using a lot of vertical turn fighting with this if you get into a turn fight style dogfight. Now, of course, being an American aircraft, this thing is best employed as a boom and zoomer. In fact, most fighters in the game should always be employed as a boom and zoom attack aircraft first and a turn fighter second, because why would you not go in with an energy advantage? It stands to reason. Now what I'm going to do is show you a pretty decent game I had over on the Ruhr map in this thing, and it perfectly demonstrates essentially all of the strengths and most of the weaknesses found in this particular aircraft. So let's hop in and have a look. Now with this particular game I spawned in pretty late, but there was still plenty of action to be had, as you will soon see. Now with the P-40, the best thing to do is to get up to an altitude of between 2,500 to 3,500 meters and start hunting for targets. Any higher than that and the engine begins to lose efficiency. It does not have very good high altitude performance, however it has excellent mid altitude performance, so sticking around those altitudes is where you want to go. Now, the first target of this particular game was a Heinkel 111 bomber. Pretty common fare at this kind of tier, and we go in for a boom and zoom on this. Now, I do make a bit of a mistake straight away, and I get a bit too close and a bit too greedy with this particular bomber. Now, granted, we do knock off its wing, and granted, we get the kill. However, it has completely destroyed the engine, and we are then forced to bail out over enemy territory. Not a particularly good start. However, we endure and we take off, and not too long after takeoff we find a lone 109 seemingly flying in a straight line. Now I don't know whether or not they were running away from a fight they had recently been in, or whether they were simply heading back to base, or like us, they were hunting around. But they were relatively low altitude and they made for a very juicy target, and it was simply a case of getting within about 400 meters, squeezing off a couple of rounds, and it went down in flames. Now, of course, when your enemy isn't flying in a straight line, the best thing to do is, of course, first of all, apply boom and zoom tactics upon it. What we have here is a fairly distracted 109 that's busy engaging a friendly B-34. In fact, it was somebody that I was flying out with on this particular match. I was flying out with two people. I was flying out with Foul Teeth and Chubby, who are two excellent pilots who often hang out on the Rat Patrol Discord server, and yes, they I'm glad they're on my side, because they are they're rather lethal in a variety of aircrafts. But currently one of them's stuck in a B-34 and they've got a rather irritating 109 on their 6, so it is of course our job to hop in and slap it out of the sky. Now you would have noticed, despite my somewhat horrid aim here, that P-40 turned pretty well in a vertical turn. That is something that you're going to see repeated quite a few times over the next few minutes. As I mentioned before we kicked into the gameplay, this thing has excellent vertical maneuverability. Now we take a quick segue from the combat here because I randomly get set on fire by a stray anti-air round in the middle of the map. This is something that's actually never happened to me before, so I don't know if there's been a recent buff to the ground-based AAA in the game, but I copped a massive hit to the fuel tank and it completely burned me out and actually killed me. Again, I'm used to being damaged by AAA, but I've never been killed by AAA other than the more clustered units you find scattered around enemy airfields. So that was a bit interesting. Now, after hopping back into the pilot seat after that fiery demise, a point appeared on the map and heavy clouds actually began to set in. I continued in the P-40 at my attack altitude, as you see here, between 2,500 to 3,000 meters, and a Focke-Wulf 190 did get spotted moving into the A point by Chubb, who was sitting in a P-38 at the time. So we were in the A point hunting for it because the A point was being contested at this point. Now, another teammate called out that there were enemies below the cloud layer, so we decided to dive in and have a look. And we don't stumble across a 190, but we do find a 109 had jumped down through the clouds and was attacking the B-34 yet again. So we apply full throttle and go in to try and get the 109 off Foul Teeth's tail. Now, Teeth is being pretty cheeky here. He is periodically dropping bombs with very short timers from his B-34 in an attempt to get a cheeky bomb kill on the 109, seeing as they are so close to the ground. And if you look carefully here, you'll actually see the splashes of the bombs hitting and exploding in the riverbed. Now we open up with a couple of rounds of the 50 cals to try and get the 109 distracted, or at least get it off Teeth's tail, and I thought we actually got the kill here on the 109, but it turns out we just critically damaged it, and unbeknown to me because the headrest was blocking it, but that 109 actually came up and followed us and tried to get on our 6. However, Chubb in the P-38 decided to save our bacon so that the 109 would not send nasty MG rounds into our fuel tanks. That is a point of note with the P-40. I have found it to be kind of flammable. Now, I don't know if that's just a bit of bad luck that I've had with it over the past couple of days, but it isn't as fireproof as some of the other American fighters at this tier, so just something to bear in mind. At this point, the A point is still being pretty heavily contested, and a couple of other aircraft have been spotted going into the A point. Weirdly, 2 aircraft then put on their smoke, which I found rather confusing as they both weren't on the same team. What it did do, however, is make it really easy for me to track and follow where the enemy fighter was, the one that was trailing the red smoke, which happened to be a 109, and the advantage of smoke means that I actually know what direction it's going in and not just where it's physically located. So I was able to get lined up and get a deflection shot on this 109 with relative ease, and yeah, taken out of the sky like that. Don't use acrobatic smoke in sim, it makes you a massive target. Now, I came across an engagement with a 109 against another American fighter, and I was going to dive in to intercept and help here. However, the 2 fighters decided to solve the problem for me by ramming into each other with much explosive results. It's always quite amusing when I see this happen in a sim game, when you end up playing chicken with your opponent. Chicken is sometimes a game where you both lose when it comes to aircraft with highly flammable parts and fuel tanks. Now, the important thing with flying the P-40, like other fast American fighters, is knowing when and when not to follow through with certain maneuvers and certain turns. So we're coming in here on the 109, and we are holding significantly more speed than them, so instead of trying to follow them through a tight turn, I take a large sweeping turn out to the right, take some of that speed and convert it into a bit of altitude, and get back on the 109's tail. This way I'm able to maintain my speed, mostly, gain a wee bit of an altitude advantage, and also keep an eye out for any other potential fighters that are coming in to try and render assistance to this fighter. Once again here, we overshoot the 109, so instead of trying to turn in with it, I convert all of that excess speed into a vertical climb, come up and over, and this gives me a prime position to come down and shoot at the 109 at a much better angle than what we had before. And as you can see, it yields some excellent results. So if in doubt, go into the vertical when you're chasing something at high speed, particularly if you think you're at risk of an overshoot. Now, of course, that is sometimes not ideal, and you can get caught out if this particular enemy you're chasing has got friends, but it is a definite tactic to consider. Now, at this point, the action was becoming pretty much non-stop in the game. It was becoming very tight in terms of points, and objectives were popping up left, right, and centre. Now, Chubb in the P-36 here managed to get a 109 and a Heinkel on his 6, which is not a particularly enjoyable position to find yourself in. However, we are able to rather rapidly remove the 109 out of the equation by performing a wonderful snapshot right here, to squeeze off a couple of rounds, and boom. I absolutely adore this aircraft in vertical maneuvers. It just handles so beautifully. So now we are going down to take out the Heinkel 112 that is still dealing with the P-36, now becoming way too fast, so I decided to pull out and away from that, from risk of pancaking into the floor. Now, our pursuit of the Heinkel 112 is rudely interrupted by the arrival of a most unwelcome Focke-Wulf 190 that came within feet of my face, which in VR is a relatively terrifying experience. Now, the 190 is one of the things the P-40 is going to struggle with, because it does have a more powerful engine and it can go faster than you in a dive, so this becomes a very defensive fight. My only hope of staying alive with a 190 is to outrate it, basically outturn it, slow it down, bleed it of its energy, which is what we're doing here. In fact, this 190 is significantly taking the bait, and we almost get a kill shot here, but we don't manage to land the hits, and the 190 with its superior energy is able to climb up and away from us, and is going to be rolling over to try and get another shot on us. Now, at this point, I'm trying to turn into their dive, keep myself away from the center of their nose, and we do so rather successfully here. This is how you defensively fight against a 190 in this particular aircraft, and at this point the 190 has realized that we are obviously not easy pickings, and they are extending away to get into a better tactical position. Now, after pulling away to bait the 190 to come back, I take the rather heavy risk of going into a head-on with a 190. However, they decide to decline an immediate head-on engagement and give me a rather decent belly shot, and we're able to hit their oil, which now puts the 190's engine on borrowed time. Now, if we get lucky, we should be able to finish off this fight with relative ease now that the 190 is going to be down on power. However, this particular pilot is making good use of their energy and altitude advantage, and if it wasn't for the P-38 coming in to distract it, we could have quite easily been clapped out of the sky at this point, because the 190 might have a damaged engine, but we have an overheating engine, and that is rapidly reducing our power. Could have got a kill shot here, but the 190 was just outside the effective range of those 50 caliber bullets, and at this point it becomes a bit more less of a dogfight and more of a strangled attempt at a pursuit. Despite having a damaged engine, the 190 was still able to outrun me in this particular situation, so after firing off a few final rounds, I decided to peel off and nurse the P-40 back to the airfield for some much needed repairs. Now, despite making it back to the airfield, when we leave the aircraft, the game still awards the kill to the 190, which I find a little bit unfair, seeing as we got the plane back in essentially one piece and the pilot is still alive, but hey, what can you do? One thing that I think this particular match did really well was highlight the P-40's ability to convert frontline speed into vertical climbs and altitude without a huge amount of energy lost due to, drag and resistance. We're able to often out-climb from a flat line at 109, so say if you've got, you're chasing a 109, if you were to both pull up into the vertical at the same time, 9 times out of 10, the Warhawk is actually going to finish its climb with more energy than the 109, which is something you don't find very often at this tier. So if you know how to fight this thing vertically, you're going to do very well at hunting 109s, which often enjoy a fair amount of clubbing at this tier. The important thing you just have to remember is speed. You need to maintain your speed in the P-40. Without the speed, you're not going to be particularly good. An absolute bottom line for speed should be about 350. Ideally, you want to keep the plane above those speeds at all possible, unless you're engaging in a particularly tight or desperate fight. So when you start seeing that speedo drop below 350, you either want to stick your nose down, or you want to level out and just go straight for a while until you pick that speed back up. Otherwise, you're not going to be much use when it comes to an engagement with 109s or 190s. Now, at this point, the match is well and truly in its dying minutes. I believe there's only 1,000 or 2 points between our team and the enemy team, and I'm diving down to engage a particularly effective 109 pilot that has been shooting down a lot of our fighters during this game. Thankfully, it hasn't shot me down yet, and with that pass I just made on it, I was able to hit its oil, which gives us an immediate performance advantage over the 109. So we convert our speed into vertical energy again, and we dive down to get another deflection on it. Now, I've had a bit of a habit with this game with opening up a bit too far out with the guns, which often does cost me a clean kill. However, with the relatively high velocity of the 50 cals, I'm more so looking to start fires at this tier rather than completely destroy the enemy airframe, which is why I can afford to open up a bit further than I normally would here. Now, the 109 is doing pretty well in terms of defensive flying. It's doing lots of sweeping turns into my dives to force me to increase the angle of my dive and thus reduce the amount of gun time on target. And it's also doing some fairly decent gentle rolls. Now, I can't afford to do much more than that due to the engine damage. Once these inline engines on the 109s and the P-40s start taking damage, they tend to lose power relatively quickly. And in fact, looking at the 109 now, I'm questioning whether or not I've actually killed its engine because it is incredibly low to the ground. My concern is the pilot could just be playing dead, essentially, gliding on power and then powering up again when I've left him alone, and they'll just fly back to their base. So we dive down, squeeze off a couple of rounds, and leave the 109 to its fate because there are now other aircraft entering the fray that we need to focus on instead. Turns out we had critically damaged the 109 and it ends up going in a few moments anyway. but I am now busy focusing on the other aircraft that are in this area. The Ju-87 did pose a potential target, however it is tailed onto us and I didn't really want to have the gunners damage my engine, so instead I focus on the 109 that is attacking the other P-40. And it is at this point in the match, because we're in the closing moments and I'm desperate to get this guy off our friendly tail to conserve some additional points, that I break a couple of my rules. Number one, I once again engage a little bit too far out. And number two, as you're about to see, I do not pay close enough attention to my airspeed and altitude, because as the 109 goes in, I also go in. So there's a lesson to be learned from that. But hey, overall, the match was a success. We ended up clutching the victory by just a couple of 100 points. And overall, we finished the game with 10 kills and 4 deaths. Admittedly, 3 of those were due to AAA or just general stupidity and not actual combat. So as you can see, overall, the P-40 is a pretty punchy little fighter, especially for a battle rating 2.3 aircraft in this game. It does have a couple of drawbacks. The chief thing you probably would have noticed is the engine is rather fragile and doesn't take that many hits to knock you out of the fight. However, the cons are definitely outweighed by the pros. It's excellent energy retention, it's high speed, and it's amazing weapon loadout for this tier. Overall, it is actually one of my favourite aircraft to fly for the US tech tree below the battle rating of 4.0. I love taking this thing out in sim. It overheats a little bit, but provided you've got a good engine management and you're conscious of not always having this thing on absolute full throttle, you should do absolutely fine with this aircraft with a bit of practice. But that concludes today's sim review on the P-40. I hope everybody enjoyed it and found it vaguely entertaining and informative. And as always, thank you all very much for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Goodbye.